first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here. But that's what you get when you attend a meeting of the traditional Britain group. You get stuck with having to listen to a German. Not only that, you get stuck with having to listen to a German far-right winger. And as if that wasn't bad enough already to make matters worse, and now we're adding insult to injury, you have to listen to a German far-right winger with an American accent. What could go wrong, right? So anyway, I'm really glad to be here, and I do apologize for my American accent. That is due to the fact that I spent some time in the United States, and as you can tell, they really did a number on me, didn't they? So, yeah, I would like to start off with a quote, actually. And it goes like this. It is true that liberty is precious. It is so precious that, in fact, it must be carefully rationed. And this quote was by Vladimir Lenin. Well, it seems current governments around the world, especially the ones in the Western democracies, must have read this quote at some time. Why else would they ration freedom by granting or withholding fundamental rights? Of course, as you might have guessed, their rationing of freedom, fundamental rights, is of course not a reflection of their appreciation for those values, but rather a reflection of their contempt for them. And that's pretty much the situation we are in right now. Besides freedom, fundamental rights, individuality present an obstacle to what they would consider to be a better world. And this better world of theirs, all men are equal, everyone is equal, there is no discrimination, there is no racism, simply it would be just a better world. But humans are the way they are. And they will simply not fit into that better world of theirs. Because it would actually mean to act contradictory to our instincts, our intrinsic ambitions. We would have to completely disregard everything which allowed mankind to survive and to thrive. Mankind was not programmed, if you will, to love others more than their own. If that were the case, mankind would have been extinct a long time ago. Let me give you a brief example. A mother has to love her children above all else. That's just a given fact. Now, does that mean that a mother does not care for the neighbor's children if need be? Of course it doesn't mean that. But it does mean, however, if it came down to whether the own children survive or the neighbor's children survive, guess what any mother would do? And I am a mother. And yes, you better believe it, my kids above all. And if that weren't the case, like I said, mankind would be extinct by now. It's as simple as that. So for this better world they are trying to accomplish, they kind of have to create a new human being now, don't they? Because the old one, like you, like me, We don't fit into that new world of theirs. But when creating this new human being, they don't bother. I mean, it's not about, humans to fit into their world. They have no regard for human beings. For them, it would be enough if whatever new human being they create, if he will not stand in the way of their glorious, brave new world. Because that's what it really boils down to. You might have read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. If you haven't done so by now, you absolutely should do it, because it really gives you a clear understanding of the extent of the disregard for human beings that is actually possible. So if you haven't read it by now, please do, and you will see the whole agenda that they're driving in a whole new, different light. Okay, but the human beings are as they are, and they kind of don't like that idea. So how do you do that? How do you get people to not resist, at least, to just kind of go along? Well, first of all, you will have to undermine democratic principles. And I'm sitting in one of the very examples of how to do that, and that is the EU Parliament. And please, I would ask you to never say European Parliament, because Europe does not have a parliament. It is the EU Parliament. But even that term in and of itself is an insult to all democratically elected parliaments around the world, because we are no parliament. We are not democratically elected. There's a gross violation of the principle of one man, one vote. You can see that as the seats are fixed per member state. So that actually means that every seat a German takes in the EU Parliament, we have 96, Germany has 96 seats, we will need more than 850,000 votes to get one seat in the House. Malta, hingegen, on the other hand, any MEP from Malta only needs 64,000 votes. So that means that, the votes in Germany, every German voter's vote is 12 times less of that of a voter in Malta. So that in and of itself would actually be enough to abolish this place. But, they are building the brave new world, so we have to kind of overlook that. So, but we have no competencies, and even if we did, that would be in gross violation of national sovereignty, which I will touch on later. A major problem, of course, is the EU Council, because with the EU Council, they have actually created a mechanism to abolish division of power. Remember division of power? That was one of those, fundamental principles of every democracy. Well, with the council, it's just done with. And how this works is that on EU level, the members of the EU Council are actually the legislation. They make the laws on EU level, but the people sitting in this council are the members of the national executive. So this intermingling of national executive and legislation, there it goes, your division of power. And what it actually means is, let's say the German government wanted to pass some kind of a law, and they can't get it passed in the Bundestag, because the Bundestag, well, at least sometimes they actually do control government. Sometimes they do. So let's say they wouldn't get it passed. Well, it doesn't matter. So the minister, he just travels to Brussels and, tells his colleagues, which are the, counterparts in other national member states, and they just pass the law there. And then it comes back to Germany and has to be implemented mandatorily, because that's the way the EU works. So yeah, just and like I said, I could talk about this for weeks, and I wouldn't be done at how bad this place actually is. But I'm going to leave it off with the words of Nigel Farage, actually, because he so eloquently said in Parliament even, EU institutions are not only undemocratic, they're downright anti-democratic. And he was right, because that's what they actually are. So whenever I hear of any country wanting to join EU, I always go like, oh gosh, please run as quickly and as far away as possible, but do not join, because it is a hellhole, it really is. And I really applaud the British people that you actually had the guts to get out of this, once again, hellhole. And I do applaud you, and I wish that the German people were, as far along as you guys apparently are. But congratulations on that. So a second thing they will have to do is undermine national sovereignty, of course. And the argument is, that they always kind of frame it in a good way, so that you go along and, you kind of see the good of it all, and, it's for the better of it all. So anyway, the argument is national states promote hostility towards one another, thus leading to war. So that's the argument, national sovereignty we have to get rid of, because it's really just that. But you know what? Let's just humor that thought for just a second. Okay, if that were the case, if it really were the case that national sovereignty, national states would actually facilitate war, well, wouldn't we be in the same fix if, let's say, there was now this EU superstate? Because you still have like the UK, you still have the US. Wouldn't we then be hostile towards these nations? So that doesn't fix the problem now, does it? So, yeah, but you kind of know where I'm going with this. Of course, the EU superstate would just be a first step. And the next step then, of course, to fix this new problem now that the EU is now possibly hostile towards UK or US or, the other way around. How to fix that? Of course, you will have to implement a one world government. And that's really what the ultimate goal of everything they're pretty much doing is. But since the peoples, all the peoples around the world, are so fundamentally different, they don't want that, and rightly so. So they have to come up with some kind of a way to get the people to just go along. How do they do that? Well, first of all, you start impoverishing the people. You take their money away. How do they do that? Well, they create all kinds of crises. So, climate change, of course. Yeah, because we're all going to die, and the planet is going to explode, and all of this is happening if we don't, and there it goes. Open your pockets, billions and billions and billions of taxpayers' money now have to go into saving the planet. I mean, you sometimes wonder, could they just, go a little lower with their, ambitions? But no. Saving the planet, that's the thing now. And just thinking of it. And of course, I'm being called, a climate change denier. Yeah, of course. In Germany, it's kind of like they play with that because, of course, we have the Holocaust denier thing. So if you take anything plus denier, and you're right there. That's it. No one listens to you anymore. But you know what? So I'm a climate change denier. That's ridiculous. I don't deny there's climate change. There's always been climate change. Ever since the world existed, there has been climate change. What I'm just contesting is the fact the small, really tiny, small human being, in the sphere of all things, are we actually capable? Do we have so much power to have really a significance a significant, could we significantly contribute to any climate change? But climate change is happening. And if you go back in history, there have been times in Europe, it was pretty much even in the north, Mediterranean-like, wine grew everywhere. And guess what? Mankind did not, was not eradicated from the planet. We're still here. So isn't the one strength of human beings to adapt? To figure out a way? Because that's what life is all about. When you cut it down, it is about survival. And if you're no longer capable of making sure that you will survive in whatever environment you're being dealt, then you will die. It's as simple as that. Then you will die, point blank. So, but like I said, I'm now this climate change denier. Then, of course, you had the Euro crisis, you might remember. It's, about 10 years ago now. Then you had, this COVID crisis. Oh, yeah, by the way, I was called a COVID denier, too. Yeah, of course I was. And an anti-vaxxer, sure. Put it all in there, but like I said, whatever. And you had energy crisis. Oh, isn't that just fantastic? So now we have an energy crisis. No, it's really about cutting down on fossil fuels. And it's an ideology they're driving once again. And this is especially from the Greens. So what we're looking at is, at the other end of the planet, there was a catastrophe, a tsunami happening. This tsunami destroyed one nuclear power plant in Japan. But this tsunami was so powerful, it destroyed all nuclear power plants in Germany. Can you imagine? Of course, in Germany, not a damn thing happened. It was the ideology-driven agenda of the Greens. And that's what got us into that fix right now. So while we turned off all our nuclear power plants, which had the highest standards, by the way, we're now buying the nuclear power from France or Poland or, I don't know where else. They don't have these high standards we had in Germany. But it's all good, because Germany, once again, interesting aspect, by the way, Germany, once again, is saving the planet. Didn't we have that like 100 years ago? Where it was like, auf Deutsch, am deutschen Wesen soll die Welt genesen. So basically, by the means of the German way, the planet shall prosper. I thought we'd overcome that. Now, it's all back, trust me. Just this time, it's from the other side, and it's the good guys doing it this time. Believe me, I swear. It's like that. So anyway, you have all these crises that are created to, get to the people's money. But then there is another problem, and that's a really big problem. And for that, they actually will have to change human behavior and human thinking. And then it ties in to creating this new human being. How? Well, by redefining concepts and ideas. Let's start off. Fundamental rights. They are now privileges, in case you haven't noticed. That, especially with the COVID crisis, the government just cut fundamental rights left and right, and people applauded. Yeah, more of them, more of them. And in Germany, people are literally begging the government for more mandates, for more infringements on their rights. It's as though, I don't know, they just lost it completely. Freedom. Freedom is now something like a reward you get for compliant behavior. Whenever you obey to whatever the government is telling you, then you get a reward. Then you might be allowed to enter, hold your breath, wait for it, a restaurant. Or you might be allowed to step into a store and buy some shoes. Can you imagine? What a freedom that is? Wow. And at the same time, when you're looking at it, I mean, the national borders, they were wide open. Anyone from the entire planet was allowed to step foot onto German territory, onto German soil. No questions asked. On the contrary, they're being housed, fed, clothed, whatever. All good. But at the same time, me, as a German citizen, I was not allowed to step foot into a freaking hairdresser's shop when I needed to get my hair cut without presenting some kind of a QR code. Isn't that absurd? But people accepted it. So once again, anyone from around the world, and they might have had COVID. They didn't have to present a QR code upon entering Germany. So everyone was allowed in. But German citizens were not, or even to ride on a bus. We were not allowed to do that without showing something. As Woodrow Wilson once said, liberty has never come from government. It has always come from the subjects of it. So where do we get off thinking we have to look up to the government to hope that they might grant us some freedom? And as I said before, I will say it again. No one grants me freedom, for I am free. Point blank. Then you have another thing. What happened to individual freedom, by the way? Remember there was something, along the Enlightenment. It was about the individual that we came to believe is the non plus ultra in any society. And societies should, come up with fundamental rights and protective rights to protect the individual. Now, that too is a consequence of the COVID crisis, so-called COVID crisis, I will have to say. Now individual freedom is selfishness. They simply redefined this. So anyone, trying to exercise their individual right to choose whether or not they get vaccinated or, whatever, that is now, it's selfishness. And you're endangering, the society if you don't get vaccinated. I mean, there was something about the Nuremberg Code, you might remember that too. No, none of that, it's even the argument is made that anyone, referring to the Nuremberg Code hasn't learned anything from history. And I'm like, excuse me? The complete opposite of what actually is going on. And this is happening everywhere. So, So once again, you have, the reversal. It was, individuality. That was, our number one priority. But now it's being shifted towards collectivism. Once again. And I thought we'd overcome that too. Then you have, of course, identity politics. Oh man, and I could go on for hours on that topic alone. It's so absurd. Because I distinctly remember a guy, he was called Martin Luther King, and he held this speech. And I think it was worldwide acknowledged to be a really good speech. And in it, he said, I dream of a color-blind nation. I dream of a nation where the man is not judged by the color of his skin, but by his character. And I thought, that is actually something worth going for. And what do the left and the Greens do? They reverse this to the complete opposite, by coming up with their identity politics. And once again, it is only about the color of the skin, by determining in what kind of a group they can kind of sort you in. This time, however, it's, they're doing that to bestow you with, some kind of a benefits. So rather than, when I grew up, it was like you worked on your strength and you worked on, whatever you had going for you. Now it's the opposite. It's more beneficial in a society that applies identity politics if you have as many disadvantages as possible. So, you should belong to a minority group. Stupid wouldn't hurt. If you're stupid, you get it all. No, seriously. So if you had some kind of a body impairment, like a limp or whatever, yeah, go for it. And if you don't have it, you kind of fake it, to get the benefits. That's the society we live in right now. And I really have to say, that is a sad society, where no longer the focus is on who are you as a human being, what are your strengths, what do you have going for you, but just looking at how can I, take advantage of whatever disadvantage I may have. That's sad. And that is a society that is actually bound to fail, because a society cannot thrive on disadvantages. That's for sure. So, and then, of course, what they also have to undermine is freedom of speech. And that is like the really big issue. Freedom of speech is the foundation of every democracy. Without freedom of speech, there is no democracy. And what are they doing? Yeah, it's a nuisance to them. They're hating it. Possibly that's why I came up with the term hate speech. So anything that is against the politically desired narrative is hate speech now. In some countries, it's even a crime punishable by law. And I think you guys are already there. Like when I remember about that guy that posted something on Twitter or whatever, and the police showing up. So I'm sorry, I have to break it to you, but you no longer live in a democracy. Sorry. So yeah, of course, disinformation, same thing. I had now the second speech censor taken down, deleted on YouTube. And the interesting part is it were official statements I made in this COVID committee that was mentioned earlier. So you can still find it on the official EU websites. But YouTube, no, that's a no-no. So I'm now, I think, blocked for like 2 weeks. And the next time they will just deplatform me. But, let them. But I will not shut up anyway. So, yeah, then you, of course, have the widespread phenomenon of cancel culture. And it's quite astonishing that, the left, it's not like, it's really hard to grasp that phenomenon. But it's like, if they had arguments, then they would present their arguments. But since they don't have arguments, the only thing they can think of is shutting you up. Well, that's a very weak position, I will have to say that. But an attack on freedom of speech, it really amounts to no less than an attack on democracy itself. So we are in really big trouble, in case you haven't noticed. And then, of course, we have cultural identity. They have to get rid of that too. You are no longer allowed to identify yourself with your culture, the culture you were born and raised in. How do they do that? Of course, mass migration, But the thing is this. A society, it can really only function if the vast majority of people in that society agree upon the basics of how they want to live together. That's how the law works, by the way. I mean, the law is always a reflection of, the consensus they have reached on how they want to live together. And the vast majority of people, if the laws are based on that fundamental understanding, will automatically abide by those laws. That, however, does not work anymore if you then import people who have a fundamentally different understanding of how society should work. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, in Germany, we are now debating to create safe public spaces for women. Can you imagine? So, when we have these fests going on, like Fasching, you might have heard of it, Mardi Gras, I guess you would call it in New Orleans. People are just on the street celebrating, dressing up in different costumes. It's really a great time to be in Germany. Yeah, well, it's not so great anymore, since you had all of these, people, coming in. They were referred to as, gold pieces at some point. Yeah, don't see it, sorry. No, but there is mass sexual harassment of women going on in broad daylight, public places. And the only thing that we're debating on this issue in Germany is if the police is allowed to refer to the perpetrators as Nafris, which is an abbreviation short for North Africans. Because that's what they used on their call-ins, on their walkie-talkies. There's some Nafris here. So that was the issue. Not that thousands of women got sexually harassed, penetrated with all kinds of objects in broad daylight. That wasn't the issue. The police is not allowed to call the perpetrators Nafris, because that is a racial slur, you might have guessed. So that's the problem we're dealing with in Germany. But the point is this. You cannot rid yourself of your cultural upbringing, of your socialization, like you would do with a coat you just slip off. So what are we actually expecting from these people? Because, of course, Chancellor Merkel, she was like, yes, of course they will have to abide by our laws. Well, how? Let me give you an example. Let's assume a European father with his family was called to Saudi Arabia on some kind of a job. So he packs up his family and they're moving to Saudi Arabia. Now, his 15-year-old daughter gets raped in Saudi Arabia. Wasn't her fault. She got raped. What do the Saudi Arabian laws call for now? They state that any woman having sexual relations and not being married, she has to be stoned to death. That's the punishment. So could we even fathom this father voluntarily delivering his daughter to the authorities so she could be stoned to death? Of course not. But that is what we're expecting, or what the left and the Greens saying they're expecting from these people now. If they come to our country, they have to abide by our laws. But they don't appreciate these laws. They don't recognize these laws because their upbringing was completely different. And just as the European father would not deliver his daughter who got raped to the authorities so they could stone her to death, on the same token, we cannot expect young men to come to Europe seeing all these, in a disobedient way, clothed women, to not grab them. They simply don't have it. So that's the difference. That's why this whole multiculturalism, whatever shebang thing, well, guess what? It's not going to work. And I am not willing to renegotiate on a daily basis how I would like to live in my own country. I will not.
We're running late.
Oh, we're running late? Okay. So I'm gonna have to speed this up now. Let me just, a few words about Islam. You may have heard of the woman that was beaten to death because she wasn't dressed properly. So our foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, she said, well, the woman having been beaten to death, this has nothing to do with religion. Nothing. Well, you laugh. I tell you what, she was right. It has nothing to do with religion. It has everything to do, however, with Islam. And Islam, in turn, has nothing to do with religion. Islam is not a religion. Islam is a totalitarian, misogynistic, misanthropic ideology. And that's what I stand by. I said it before, I say it again. That's my opinion on Islam. So now I'm going to rush through this. Okay, though you have family, destruction of family. They need to cut the bonds because family is the strongest bond you could possibly imagine because it's a bond of blood. So, of course it goes further. And that's why socialism always attacks families first. They deconstruct them. One example would be women need to be liberated. They need to stand on their own feet. They need to go to work. Well, what's the consequence of that? The state gets a hold of the kids in daycare centers and can indoctrinate them. That's the whole point for them, to liberate women. Then you have transgender, of course. And transgender is, the attack on the very core of who we are and of what we are. They invade spaces of women and the dressing rooms. Look at, what's happening, especially in the US with women's sports. And there's a lot of money in it too now. So, once again, men, if the left narrative was actually true, that men have nothing better to do than to keep women down all day long, and apparently you don't have really nothing better to do. Well, why would you allow men, dressing up as women, okay? Why would you allow men to get into women's sports? They're putting down these women, they're keeping them down once again. And especially in women's sports. I will have to say this. I'm terribly sorry, but I say it anyway. A woman with a penis is really a man with no balls. Point blank. And then they would put their hands on our kids now. I don't know if you follow what's going on in the United States. It's now considered child abuse to not be gender affirming or give gender affirming care to your children. Gender affirming care, interesting term, isn't it? It's all nice and good gender, they're affirming and the care. Good words. Why don't they call it what it is? Bodily and genital mutilation. That's what it is. And I always say, there is no such thing as transitioning into the other gender. And it's the other gender because there's only two, men and women, two. So there is no way to transition into the other gender. What you can do, however, you can hack up your body. You can cut out and cut off all those wrong parts. You can do that. Absolutely. Sure. But you will never be the other gender. All you will ever be is an imposter in a mutilated body. That's it. That's all you will ever be. So, what it really boils down to is this. It is about stealing our identity on every level. Our biological identity, cultural identity, national identity, identity of who we are, what family do we... They're stealing all of that. Because they cannot do, or you're not supposed to be free individuals. You're not supposed to be a character or have a unique personality, who, God forbid, should even dare to hold an opinion. You're not allowed to do that because you're an obstacle for the brave New World agenda. What they need is a mindless, malleable mass. That's what you're supposed to be. And that's what they're creating to make you fit into. Well, they won't be able to do that with you, of course, but there's lots of other people. So if tradition actually means anything, wouldn't it first and foremost mean to honor what our fathers and forefathers spilled their blood over? Wouldn't it mean to defend the very precious gift they wrestled from former elites, which they then passed on to us, and which we are supposed to pass on to our children? The precious gift of freedom. And when I quoted Woodrow Wilson earlier, I only quoted him partially, because the quote continues like this. Earlier I said, liberty has never come from governments, it has always come from the subjects of it. And he goes on saying, the history of liberty is a liberty of limitations of governmental power and not the increase of it. Why don't people understand this? So what I'm saying is, should it not be our duty to the generations of the past and the generations of the future as well, to always remain vigilant of governments? Because governments will always try to infringe on your rights. And lastly, I would like to say, I do not wish to become humanity, part of humanity, whatever that may be. I'm absolutely, totally happy just to simply remain German. As I would think you are just happy to remain British, aren't you? So, and I would like to leave off with yet another quote, Albert Camus. He said, the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence becomes an act of rebellion. And that's what I consider myself to be. So, dear global elites, whoever you are, I have indeed become so absolutely free, and I will continue to speak truth. I will continue to fight you, and I will continue to stand with the peoples of the world. So if you really want to implement your sinister, dehumanizing agenda, you will have to get past me. Because what can I say? Here I stand and I can do no other. And at that point, God bless Martin Luther for his stance that he once took. And God bless all the brave and courageous people around the world who have stood up in the past, who are standing up now, and who will stand up in the future to fight all of those whose goal is to abolish freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. That is our right, and we should fight for it, and I will always fight for exactly that. And I hope you join me in this fight. Thank you so much.